Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope we're live. This is my first time using this venue of streaming through YouTube. So I'm apologizing in advance if there's going to be some oopses and technical difficulties. Um, could you please let me know if the sound is okay and if you can see me and hear me? That would be great. Um, all right. So I assume that you do. Um, and let's start. We maybe just a few seconds earlier, but again, thank you everyone that could join and find the time. Today we, thank you, James. Now I know I'm on. Um, so now I know that we live, and let's get to it. One of the things I discovered that this program doesn't really allow me to do a slideshow and uh, painting demonstration from two different um, iPads and iPhones. So I'm going to fix that problem. But for today, I'm just going to turn my phone. Sorry for that. I'm going to go right to my setup. And we're going to, no, I'm still on. Just putting my phone into the thing. So almost there. And let's get to a slideshow. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to show you my iPad. And so today's topic is a myth about skin tones. And why did I call a myth about skin tones? Because skin tones is quite real. Uh, because it's full of misconceptions. And the most common question that I'm often asked is how do I mix my skin tones? What colors do I use? And let's start from saying that the skin tone, when we say tone, we really mean the value. Tonality is how dark or light something is. It has nothing to do with the hue or the color of the skin or anything of other objects at all. So that's kind of a one misconception. So we should really ask the question, what color is the skin, not a skin tone. The other misconception is nothing really has a local color. um, Forget about the portrait and the skin. Let's think about a green apple. When you look at the green apple, what the origin of the green color is the light coming to the surface of that apple and reflecting back into your eye. Some light rays get canceled out, some don't, and that's how the green color originates. But if you take that green apple and place it into a warm light, the color of green will change into more yellow green. If you take that apple into cool light, it will change into the blue green apple. If you take the apple into the red under red light, it will change the color completely. So there is really the concept of local color doesn't really quite exist. And it's true about the color. So, how do we think about color skin as a pink color? And we have a lot of tubes in our, sorry, just moved the camera. If you go to a paint store, you will come across a lot of tubes that are called portrait pink, skin tone, and so forth. And surprisingly, or not, they are all pink coloration. So somehow, in the consciousness of their mind, of our mind, we think of the skin tone as pink, and that's really the biggest misconception that we have about skin tone. Forget about that. We do have more than one ethnical groups and racial groups that have either white skin, olive skin, red brown skin, and dark skin, ranging from yellow ochre brown all the way to the ivory blue black skin. So the definition of color of skin is really much wider than a tube paint of pink paint. And as I already mentioned, the color scheme will change dependently, number one, on a light source, whether it's a cool light or warm light. It will change even by the age of the person. For example, the younger skin will reflect the light much more and more vibrantly, while the older skin that's already textured and seen some pigmentation and aging processes will reflect light very differently. The other factor is what light conditions you are painting in. If it's a diffused light or ambient light, the skin tone will look differently than if it's a dramatic light, and the drama of light and shadow or will bleach out the color with the streaming light over the form of the portrait. So to kind of make my point that it would be very convenient for me to give you the answer of couple paints, how to mix the skin color or skin tone as it came to be known. But it would be a great mistake on my part because that answer doesn't really exist. Uh, as we see, the coloration of the skin changes depending on many, many factors. But I am here to help you and to guide you and give you some tools to come to understand how to paint portrait. And so if we talk about portrait, we have a few ways of painting it. Number one is just look at the model and copy spot to spot, color to color, value to value, and be very true and accurate to the way the model looks. This is definitely not my way, and I don't think it's a very exciting way of painting and allows for beautiful results at the end. The other way is to really exaggerate the skin tones and go wild and interpret them in any ways of possible. And the third way, which I would try to show you today, is really comes from a school of Rembrandt, which is, and we're looking right now at beautiful self-portrait of Rembrandt done in his 60 more at the end of the life when he is really becoming more and more experimental with the color and the use of paint. Uh, and in that way, what Titian and the Rembrandt, well, and we can maybe step back to Caravaggio, really brought to us is rather than just painting a portrait of likeness, what they were painting is dramatic light flowing over the surface of the face, really describing all the topography, all the hills and valleys and hills again of the face. And so in this way of painting, where you're really not concerned so much with painting individual features or painting individual local coloration of the skin, you are more you're more concerned with allowing the light and painting the flow of light streaming down and describing the topography of the face. And then, as a side effect, a beautiful likeness and a beautiful portrait full of life, full of spirit and character comes out of that. So, this is the technique that I will try to show you. Let's look at just the next slide. And this is an English painter, um, not really in the school of Rembrandt. But in this slide, I want to draw your attention again how interpretation of color of the skin can be so different. You probably will never meet a person with that lemony Naples yellow color as their skin tone. But what this portrait does show is a beautiful sense of light and atmosphere that that portrait is alive and it lives inside of the its background, uh, its environment. And so, what I want you to notice is how flat the value of light is on the forehead from one side to another. There is very little differences in values, but rather, as you can see, there is a slight coloration and slight temperature shift from a cooler, greener light to a more warmer light back to the greener light. And we can see the same thing from the one cheekbone to another side of the face. We can see the flatness that the artist uses to portray the strength of that light reflecting. So there is less concern with really showing how round the forms are without so much using of values, but more really keeping the value as long as possible the same. And then just using the temperature change for really showing you the frontal plane of the nose, the side plane of the nose, the frontal plane of the cheekbone, the side plane, and so forth. So this is what I'm going to try to show you in my demonstration. In this slide, of course, a famous portrait of Van Gogh, you can see again how freely the interpretation of color of skin is. Now it's becoming really nothing to do with nature, but more using color as an emotional impact. The difference between the green skin tone and the red um, beard of Van Gogh is really pushing each other apart. And of course, the beautiful quality of the brushstroke. So again, this slide I put to show you that you can use not just pinks and variations of cool and warm of red and yellows, but in this portrait of Ilya Repin, you can see the same use of green that Van Gogh used, but it's a much more subdued. And that green is explained by her outfit, the green jacket that is reflecting to the side planes. And green is juxtaposed to the quality of her uh, cheekbones that are cooler, pinker quality that push themselves into space forward and creating that way a beautiful forms and the shapes of the face. Let's see what the next slide. And again, this is a very unnatural color scheme, very yellow, very saturated, orangey, yellow skin tone. And in this painting, Serov paints the girl completely submerged into the shadow, except maybe just a little ray of light touching her cheek, side of the cheek. And using a darker values for the shadow, he really contrasts her with the light coming from the back. So again, your light conditions, what is it that you're painting? Are you painting a fully lit up light, or you painting a portrait that is completely immersed in shadow? Will really dictate some of the choices that you will make into about your colors of the skin. This one I really put to again emphasize that you don't really need to change the value drastically to create a portrait that is fully lit up and almost like luminous, illuminates the light with dramatic, of course, background, and really unifying everything uh, except that spot of light of her face. Again, notice how little the value varies all over the face. And that is the key to the luminosity, is to really give as much space as possible to the light. So the impact of the light will carry really across the room from a distance. It will have this magnetic pull in itself. And so you can see that in this portrait, the space given to the shadows is really minimal, but the drama is really created by contrasting it to the background and to the dress. This slide I put just to show you how a flat light again carries itself much further relative to this portrait next to the face that is not illuminated and really uses value to create a form. So if you overuse the values, meaning using darker then lighter, more light then darker again, what happens is you are killing or submerging light into the lesser quality. When you keep your value as bright as possible for as long as possible, you get the strength of the light. So this slide I really put for contrast, for you to show you the difference of use of really economy of value and using temperature and edges to create the forms, or using values and how that portrait right away dims into the lesser light. And one more, or maybe not, one more slide, a more conventional portrait. This one I put for comparison to my next slide. You can see how the skin is painted very smoothly, hardly any brush strokes. Beautiful sense of light though in luminosity, luminous quality. Of course, this smoother skin is really contrasted with a texture that's applied everywhere, even the background, her silky scarf, her pearl wear and decorations. So it's in that way quite beautiful contrast. But let's look at something like this, which is painted by Nikolai Fechin. And you can see how much more this face is so textural and so beautifully painted. And again, in this slide, I want to show you the example of how warmer colors come forward. So you can see the use of really almost like a this whole passage of red from one cheekbone to another, with almost lost edges to the nose and maybe just darkening and saturating the point of the nose more. The warmer colors in the light come forward. The cooler colors in the light recede back. So the forehead seems to be moving back while the cheekbones with the nose is coming forward. So using, rather than a value, because they are very, very close in values, using a temperature to really create and build the forms. And here's an example of very painterly approach and the difference between the coloration of the neck with very grayish, yellow, ochreish feel to the neck to much well, I would say it's relatively warmer to the neck, but yet the colors that I use are very cool alizarans, cool violet, violet purples and grays. And then you have this very pink ear. And even though I disagree with such coloration of ear because it becomes almost a dominant effect in this portrait, um, I do want to show you how almost two different stories of yellow, ochre, and gray can exist in one portrait with the face being more red, and yet there is common denominators, common colors that unite them in those beautiful gray greens and gray violets. And that is my last slide, and I just want to show you how the use of the background in the skin tones really helps to create the form as well. When you bring your background into your skin tones, you connect that feature or that area to the background. So notice how the neck, even though it has a feel of light, it still moves back towards the background, while the face that is quite opposite of coloration, instead of gray, it's cooler pink with some under layers of gray coming through the pink, it is moving forward. So again, when you ask me what color should I use for my skin tones or skin color, I would have to ask you, what is your background? What is the light source? Cool, warm. Who are you painting? What is the person wearing? What is the environment around it? How dramatic the light is? And many more questions that would influence your decisions and your choices about the painting that portrait. So I'm done with my lecture, and again, I apologize for the quality of slides. I will find a different way. And now let's start. And I'm sorry, I do want to mention that I will have time to answer all your questions at the end of the live stream. So I will turn my camera back on me, and please write me the questions and I will go over them. And another thing I want to mention, that I will probably not be able to answer uh, all the questions, and everything that I do want to say today may not fit into our time frame. So I want to tell you that we will have this live stream every month for my Patreon members. This time I opened it to all the free members as well. And maybe for a couple times I will do that again. But for my Patreon members, this recording will be edited, improved, and placed in a platform, so you will be able to watch it again if you'd like that. And please, if questions will come up, you can always email me and I'm happy to answer them. So we come to the time where I will do a demonstration. And again, what I would like to teach you today or share with you, and you might already know that, so I would like to show you a way to use color intelligently to build the form and the space and the feel of air and distance and atmosphere, rather than look at photography, my photo reference, and say, well, there is a warmer color here, so I'm going to copy this, and there is a cooler color in highlights, so I'm going to copy that. I will use my reference as a almost like a topography map to see what the form of the face are doing as I'm painting the light and shadow shapes. And of course, most of the information that we receive about the portrait comes from the light shape. And I call that a light flow. So I will start. I'm going to take a little bit of my medium, and you can see my palette where I'm going to be mixing. 1 second, I'm just going to adjust a little bit more light, bring a little bit more light. Hopefully that will make a difference. Okay, so my medium today is Imposter Liquid by Winston Newton. And in terms of the paints, the brands of the paints and the kinds of paints that I'm using, I have that information on my website. I have that soon to be placed in Patreon. But I want to say that there is no magic paint, there is no magic brush. You have to figure out what works for you, what colors you're comfortable with, what brands you like, what medium works for you. I can give you what I use because my experience um, of painting made me more comfortable with those choices, and there is a reasons why I made those choices. But you as a person, very different from me. You have a different, you can be, for example, a cooler painter, and I'm a warmer painter. So your color choices might be different from mine. But what I do have is two temperatures of every hue, yellow, red, blue, and earth tones and whites. I really try to limit my color palette to now almost 15 colors. And another color that I do like to bring is some cooler neutral gray, about 50% to use. But I will start a painting portrait by establishing shadow shapes and taking out everything that is not my light. So to start painting a portrait, all you need is to first set up the stage by taking out, and I say taking out or painting everything that is not a light flow. So I need a bigger brush because that will take me a long time if I'll do that with a smaller brush. And I do recommend starting painting with a bigger brush because big brush will hold you away from getting specific too soon. And one of the hardest things in painting is to not pay attention to smaller details and look first, and not just first, but always look at the big relationship. I'm going to just skip the bows. I will find them later using a little bit more medium. It's a little cold in the studio, so the paint is a little bit resistant in flowing. So when do you use a medium? You use a medium to improve the flow of paint. If you're painting areas that you don't need to stretch a paint as much, then please don't use a medium. Paint with paint. The more paint you use, the richer your painting becomes and the easier the painting process will be for you. So here I set it up this. Since I have this color, I'm just gonna bring a little bit into the same coloration of the eyebrows. And now I'm gonna mix a shadow color of my shadow shape. So I will use a little bit of um, terra rosa or red ochre, whatever earth color of red you have. And notice that I'm mixing right into my dark spot. And then I'm gonna add, I think it's dark enough. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow into that shadow for luminosity. Yellow is a color of translucency and luminosity. So then I'm gonna just make a little brush stroke and see if my shadow shape is dark enough. That's one of the common mistakes that beginners, I would say, or students make, is to start with the shadow that is too light. And if you start with a shadow that is too light, you can't lighten more. You've already reached uh, that value. And also, you would have to make your lights so much more brighter to compensate for the lack of shadow, for the shadow being weak. Shadow has very important functions in the painting. One of them is to support the flow of light. And if your shadow is too weak, is too light, the support is not efficient enough. The light can flow through the shadow, and then the shadow doesn't stop the light. I'm just gonna take and simplify the bottom plane of the nose and the cast shadow as one, and a little shadow under the mouth. And that's pretty much all the shadow shapes that I see, except maybe just a little bit of a shadow from her eyelashes. And of course, a little shadow here that just gets slightly washed out by reflective light. And then maybe just for the lips, there is a shadow of the lips, a little bit darker. The bottom, the top lip is all in shadow, and then there is some reflective light coming. But you know what I'm gonna do is just give this whole lips just a tone, and then I'll show you how I will find the shapes again. Hopefully I have time for that. But just not to have an empty space here, I will do that instead. Okay, forgot to. All right, so let's say there's just a tiny shadow shape here. The next thing I'm gonna do is just give my background a little bit of a color. Now, at this point, I don't really know what my background should be, simply because the task of the background, the function of the background is support my foreground. But at this point, I have no foreground. So how do I know what I should use for my background? So the way I make my choice of the background is I start neutral, and I'll start kind of almost in the middle of my value scale. And then as the portrait develops, I will darken or lighten areas that will be complementary and helpful to my foreground. So unless you have a very good idea, conceptual idea what your painting should look, for example, you want to paint a very dramatic dark light. Remember that slide that I showed you where only the face becomes illuminated by light, but everything else is really just submerged in darkness. Unless you know that this is how you want your portrait to look, then you would darken uh, the whole background. But for me, I'm not so sure. I don't have that concept in mind. I might go lighter, I might go darker in some areas. Um, so I paint my background almost somewhat semi-transparent, and I make it more painterly, a little bit brush strokes, a little movement in paint, a little transparency. And then I'll decide how much flatness or the values and colors that I will adjust. I have to say the color that I chose being neutral because I'm going to use those neutral colors in the areas where I want my form to recede. And just to show you, sometimes you can do things like this. You can take a little bit of your gray-green background and bring just slightly, very little paint in the areas where the form will be receding. So for example, the forehead will be moving back towards the background. The side plane of the cheekbones and the jars will be moving into the background. The transition between the shadow and light will have a little bit of my background color. The skin that touches the bone on the orbit of the eye socket will also be thinner and more colorized with gray and green. So, and then of course, the forehead that is turning away from the light can also have a little bit of green. So you can do that a little bit now. I sometimes do it and sometimes I don't, but I thought I'll show you this way because, again, I put a very thin layer of that gray color in. And as I paint, I'm going to mix my paint into it and show you how that gray is going to influence the paint that I'm laying into the light. Now, before I do start painting the light, I'm just gonna do a little bit of the neck, and I'm gonna take a little bit of yellow ochre and my background color, and maybe a little bit of white, mix in, and I'm just gonna slightly give, I need a little more yellow. I put too little color, so it's becoming too gray. And then I'm putting that into my neck and just adjusting the shadow that has slightly different shape. And I want the shadow be lost in the hair here. So the edge of the neck of the shadow of the neck will be connecting to my color of the hair. And then just before I start the light, I'm just slightly gonna darken the contrast here. And I know I can do that later as well, but I already know that I'd like to have that. So in my painting, I always like to paint the finish as soon as possible. So when you see things, don't postpone them unless you have some kind of a strategy. But because painting is all about painting relationship, when I darken this depth of the hair that goes more inside, what happens to the value of the shadow? It becomes a little bit lighter. And so if I hold that back, then the shadow will look darker. So again, every brushstroke you add to your painting influences and changes the brushstrokes that were there before. And that is why, again, I'm encouraging you to paint the end result as soon as you know it and as soon as you see it. Now, I have my dog brush, and I just want to, 1 second, I'm going to get another big brush. Okay, just to start the light. So if you can see my palette well, I started with transparent red oxide, adding phthalo blue to darken it. Then I went to my shadow shape, and then I came to my background, and then to the neck, and some cooler coloration of skin. Now I'm gonna step away from it and get my white. Again, my white is very thick, so I'm gonna see if this white is a little bit more fluid. I always put more than one white because one white is transparent and one is opaque. But more than that, sorry about that, I'm just gonna loosen up the paint slightly with a medium. And so here I'm starting the flow of light. So painting, mixing colors in painting really starts on the palette. And how you think about your colors, really your palette reflects it. So if we talk about color harmony, if your palette looks like a drops of different colors that are placed in the different places, and here you have pink, and here you have yellow, and here you have greenish and grayish, and they're all disengaged and in the different places. It's very hard to create color harmony from those spotty palettes. So the way I teach is I teach you to draw out the colors from two families, the family of dark and the family of light. So I'm painting a person of the probably, Caucasian, white. She has a little bit of a makeup, which is I'm quite aware of. But what I want to do again is not concentrate on copying my photo reference, spot to spot, color to color, but use the information of my uh, reference to really create a three-dimensional illusion, the portrait with forms, but more than that, with coherent flow of light. supported by the shadow. So to mix her the light, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about my portrait is three color areas. Forehead will be less color, more light, and has very little to do with pink coloration. So it will be cooler and less color. My second part of the portrait, so the first one is here. My second part of the portrait, which includes the nose and the cheekbones, will have a little bit less light, but more warmer coloration. My muzzle will have a little bit more light, sorry, and a little bit less pink coloration. It has a lot of side planes here and here, so it will pick up some of the paint from the background into it. And my third part of the face will be much more submerged into the background and be darker. So I'm taking a little bit of red, I'm taking some of the background color, and I'm putting into my chin. And then the only place that will repeat my warm color of the cheekbone and the end of the nose will be a frontal plane of the chin that is protruding forward, and will be the eyebrow muscle here that's protruding forward relative to the forehead that is coming to away and over towards the background. So I'm going to just repeat myself to make it clear. The way I will think about flowing the light is using a cooler and more light on the forehead because it's a bigger shape. It has most flatness out of all the anatomy of the face. And because the skin is tightly stretched over the bone, so it reflects more light, and its closest shape towards the light source. So all of those factors explain why the forehead becomes the most lit up, the coolest area of your flow of light. The cheekbones and the end of the nose are the most protruded areas of the whole face. So I'm going to use a warmer color to pull them out towards me, because one truism, meaning something that all is true, that warmer colors in the light will come forward, while cooler colors in the portrait will recede back. The muzzle I'll be painting with less warmer color because it's to separate from this part, the second part of my face, and because it does have a lot of side planes. And from the cheekbone area, this is all the planes that are starting to move away from a light and face more side planes, more of an air, so they will be filled up by air. Okay, now when I explain that, let me start painting. So one thing I know, and I have to be aware of, that, and by the way, all I'm mixing here is cadmium yellow light with just a little bit of cadmium red. And there is a more dominance of yellow color in here than it is the red, as we spoke. So I'm going to take my first brush stroke and I'm going to put it to the most protruded area, the corner of that face. From this corner, this becomes a side plane, the temple side plane. This becomes a frontal plane facing the viewer. And from this corner, it's moving to the side plane into the shadow. So my brightest light I put here to gauge if I need more color to my skin tone or less. So another concept that I want to introduce you to, that when you add more color to your skin, the light becomes dimmer. So notice that I just added a little bit more yellow. The reason why I added more yellow here, because if I don't have enough color in my light right now, I will not have enough space to put my highlight. My light will be so bright that highlight will be very difficult to put in because they will be too close in the value range. So I added a little bit of color to allow a little space for my highlight. Now I'm gonna add a little bit of gray into my light, and I'm gonna pass my brush stroke with just a little less pressure, because here I don't want a sharp edge. I want a softer edge coming into the hair. The hair here are growing, the roots are growing this way, so the edge with the hair will be much softer. And the gray or the greenish gray or the violet gray will help this become more of a side plane, and it comes out to this level. Now with the same, maybe a little bit more color, keeping the value very close, not changing the value. Remember my slideshow, this was a whole point of the slideshow. And now again, I'm gonna release the pressure from the brush. Remember, I put the gray color here. Notice just by sliding my brush, the white on my brush is mixing into the gray area, the gray color that I put just before I start painting. And notice how the value and the coloration of that little space before shadow became grayer or grayer violet. So without changing my paint color, I changed the look of the color just by the how I apply the paint. The same thing here. The roots of the hair, I need to soften the edge. So I'm just sliding the white into the coloration of my hair and opening up the edge to allow for connection, for an open edge. So the hair doesn't look like it's a hat or a helmet put on top, but there is a flow of light. And later, or rather now, since I've told you that it's good to paint all of it at once, I'm gonna move that flow as a highlight on a hair, using a little bit of a blue and my background color as a highlight. So here's my background, and I'm just gonna pull it into the hair again. And that's how my highlight begins. It doesn't mean that that's how they're gonna end, but right now, what I want to have is an open edge, as allowing the flow of light, almost like the color of skin can enter into the hair and connect it. Let's go a little bit further. So I've painted my forehead, and the only thing that I need to do now, oh, sorry, take a little bit of white into the yellow. And the only thing that's left to finish this forehead is to put a highlight. And so my highlight has to be the coolest light possible. Again, because we associate the bright light with the cool temperature. Maybe because it's just our conditioning, because we spend so much time outside and the daylight is cool. And nowadays we are able to lit up our environment with the daylight lamps, which was pretty impossible for Rembrandt and couple centuries after him. You have to realize that people lived in the darkness, not only just their environment lit up by candlelight, which is a warmer light, but also because um, the sunlight was much more limited. They didn't have the lights on the street. So they were more accustomed to darkness than we at our time and age. So highlight is always the coolest light that we have. And it also, I really recommend using imposter, thicker paint to really pull your highlight out of the painting. Um, so you're using what we call a quality of paint, the difference between a thinner paint and a thicker paint, to describe the corner of the plane, and the highlights are always put in the corner of the one plane changing in another. So you can see how the frontal plane changes into the side plane here, and the highlight originates. So my next thing would be is just allow a little bit of the warmer pinker quality right next to eyebrow to pull that a little bit more forward. This is the most protruded part of the forehead. So by giving a little bit warmer coloration, I'm making sure that the form of the forehead is going back here and coming forward next to eyebrow. What happens after? After we have a key-shaped glabella here that is receding back. And so again, I'm picking up a little bit of my background, and I'm putting a slight gray into that area of the keystone. And I'm gonna put it right to the side plane of the nose, and a little bit more into the side plane of the nose. Now we got a little bit too much contrast of temperature change and color change. So to cure that, I'm just gonna bring a little bit of one into another, and then bring gray a little bit out as well. So it's almost like you're doing an exchange where you're trying to merge the warmth into the cool and the cool into the warm. And that's how, and again, it might be done a little bit crudely right now. Everything takes finesse. But in the beginning of the painting, as we start, we try to paint big statements. And then as the painting progresses, we're going to bring more and more finesse. What I call is we first build the big bridges, and then we create smaller passages between those big bridges. So let's continue. And there is many ways to keep painting that light flow. You can paint now the nose back into the glabella. You can go from the cheekbone, or you can go through eyebrow and then come to the cheekbone. So there is always more than one way of doing things. My way is not the only way. And I think what I'd like to show you today is the logic behind how I think about colors, how I use them uh, as a to create a space and again topography of the face, to pull some areas out and to push some areas into the space. And so now what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to take a little bit of gray and I'm going to pass the light through eyebrow and paint a bit of a light. So notice as I pass the light through eyebrow, I'm not using a lot of pressure. I still want some of that eyebrow to be left there, but I also don't want the eyebrow to stop my light, as if it was a painted line that holds the light into the forehead. Now notice that this area is a eye socket, and you don't want this to become too protruded. You want the eye to sit back. And so I'm going to use a little bit of a lesser light and less color to allow first the eye socket to look more inside rather than protruding faster than the cheekbone. And I'm going to use just a little bit of color into my background, and I'm going to bring this as one. And I'm going to bring a little bit of more background and connect this. And some of you is probably saying, oh gosh, but I'm losing details. Now I don't know where the eye is. And I would say in painting, you have to be willing to lose details for the sake of the common, of the bigger good, I guess. So here I'm using a little bit of a warmer temperature to bring this forward. But truly, I just want to take this eye and completely wash away the edges and then find it later. And again, I just hope this is a bit difficult because there is so much to do in the portrait, and I don't know if I'll get into all the subtleties and details. I do want to show you big ideas. Um, but here, I guess for me, it's more important to show you that you have to be able to lose things first and then find them later, even for the sake of how the light flows and how things are more unified, rather than painting each feature. Sorry, I just touched the camera, individually. So we connect them as much as we can, and then we'll find the way to separate them. So let's now, I will show you how to pull the nose out of the face by painting that first, and then I'll get back to the cheekbones. So I will use a little bit more color into my light. Notice in my mind, I don't think about this as a skin color or skin tone, which is again not a right definition for that. But I'm thinking about this in terms of temperature. How warm do I need this to be? And if I make this edge of the nose warmer and even a little darker than what my photograph shows me, that nose will be a stronger feature on the face. If I make it too light, and I do need to get to a little smaller brush for this job, then the nose will kind of be lost in the face. So I'm using temperature and maybe just a little bit of a value change. And I'm going to show that just slightly more. If I don't like it, I can always lighten up. That is too cool. So a little bit more color on the bowl of the nose. And the nose being redder justified by softer tissue of cartilage. So the nose is much smaller shape than the cheekbone, so it doesn't get as much light as the cheekbones. So that is partially why it's darker. And as I move on that nasal bone towards the glabella, I become less colored. And notice that I've mixed a little bit of a yellow and become even less color. So you can put more color and then you can take some of that color away by the second movement. And then for the side plane of the nose, I will add a little bit of my yellow ochre, and it already has a gray. And all I want is just a little bit more darkness on top. And that's just finish a little bit of a nostril. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of my gray and just slightly pass it on the meeting place of the shadow and light. And again, just like what we did with the forehead, the last thing we need to do is finish this by putting a highlight. And just like I said, highlight will be placed on the corner of the nose, on the corner of that keystone glabella and the nose bone, and it will slightly stream down on the corner of the frontal plane, separating the side plane. And as you will see, that will be a few other highlights at the corner of the side plane and the eye. Maybe that's a little too big. And then later on, streaming down, separating the side plane of the nose and the cheekbone. And by the way, one of the most common mistakes in painting nose is that you're making side plane too small. The side plane ends right here. So make sure you don't make it too thin. And then I will come back to a little bit of my yellow ochre and my gray, and I will put that on the other side of my nose. Sorry. And then taking a little bit more color, I will take that and slightly swing this and open the edge, and I will do the same here and open the edge. This is a mental note for me to keep the flow of light open. So in here, the light that is rests in a nozzle bone is able to slide down on both ways. So here it's the same thing. This piece of light is able to just slightly illuminate with more light the side plane. It just literally falls off that. And then the top of the, sorry, just not enough color. The top of the bowl gets a little bit more light now. So notice with all these changes, the nose that seemed to be so red now is not that red. And we're going to work with that more. So now I'm going to come back to my bigger brush, and I'm going to start painting with a little bit more quicker pace, just to show you, trying to finish. I know you have things to do, and in some places it's getting late, so I don't want to hold your day hostage. So here, this is the cheekbone. I'm using a little bit more warmer colors on the most protruded area. And I'm going to give the same little note on the other side. And then as I come towards the eye, I'm just slightly mixing in a little bit of a grayer, uh, neutralizing this color. And again, remember, without bringing too much paint, because I already put some gray into that paint, I'm able to, and if I'm not able to, I will add more to get a little bit more gray effect to it. Now it looks like she has somebody hit her in the eye. So I will, correct this, but it's the right idea. It's just a little bit more subtle than I did. And then I also can bring a little bit of a greener coloration. So maybe add a little bit more blue and yellow quality. And as my cheekbone moves away to the temple plane, towards the temple plane, I will introduce a more desaturated skin tone. And then as the cheekbone falls and rounds off here, I'm just simply gonna introduce a little bit more slight change of value. And then just bring a few merging brush strokes. Okay. And then on the top of it, I'm gonna bring a highlight. You know, just before highlight, so I don't have a gaps, let me stream this. This is a separate piece, not connected to the cheekbone, coming and defining the side of the nose. And then with just a slight warming up, I'm gonna indicate this fold. And then by using less pink and more yellow, remember we said we're gonna separate the muzzle from the cheekbone like this. Now, if it's too bright, I'm gonna adjust it. Remember, the whole process of painting is about adjusting. You put your best estimate, you put your best leg forward, and then you reevaluate and you rethink what it does. So here I'm pulling some of this now down, and because it's coming down, maybe again it doesn't need so much pink, but rather change the coloration into a little bit more desaturated greener gray area. And the same thing with muzzle. Here it's coming around the lip and now it's facing the background. So it's a good place to give a little bit more background quality. So let's see what we need to do just to finish this cheekbone. And again, I'm picking up a little more gray and desaturating this color into the more grayer violet. I want to say, want to make sure that we're on the same page, that if I had a greenish background rather than grayish violet, I would be using for my side planes more greenish tonalities. So, but since my background is gray, that is why I'm more kind of a prone to use rather stay in the same color family of violets and here. Okay. But occasionally I can also play that differently. All right, so let's finish this. I'm just gonna bring a little bit more color and make sure that my most protruded area is the warmest. This cheekbone coming, and a little bit of less value is holding. Here I'm using a little bit of ochre color, holding that cheek, the light on the cheek back, and then transitioning into the desaturated color. And all I have to do now is use my highlight to make the corner. Notice when the form becomes smaller, like a forehead is a bigger shape, so it will have the biggest highlight. The cheekbone is a smaller shape than a forehead, so it will relatively have a smaller highlight. So here the highlight originates on the cheekbone and moving back, and there is another highlight that divides the side plane of the nose into the frontal plane. And then there is another highlight that picks up a little bit of the corner of the muzzle and actually flows down the side of the muzzle and comes to the in a place where canine tooth is, you'll have a little bit of that highlight. Okay. Now, of course, this looks too much lit up because the lips are so dark as well, but I will change the coloration slightly by applying a little bit more warmth right next to the lips. And that's again because here it is the most protruded area of the muzzle. And I will do a little bit where the lips, where the edges of the lips are. And that is partially to help me soften the edges of the lips. So this is a little bit of a trick. I don't like to talk about tricks in the paintings because there is no tricks, there is no secrets. There is just logical thinking. How am I doing with the camera? I've been probably moving it a little bit. And so let's now come to the space and paint. And just one little second before that, I'm gonna bring a little bit of a shadow on the bottom of that nostril. And I'm gonna paint just a slight reflective light on the hook of that nose. And a little bit on the other nostrils. Okay. And then again, I'm trying to speed up a little bit because honestly, the demonstration for the portrait, for a good portrait, will take a good 3 hours. So I know I don't have the luxury of that time. But again, if you are interested in seeing more detailed process of me painting, I have videos on my Patreon, about 15 videos on the portrait, still life, some pet portraits, and they also placed on my website for sale, individual sales. So you don't have to sign up, be in a subscription if you don't want to. You can definitely watch them one by one, and they are very affordable. Anyway, so I just gave a little bit of the top plane light and reflected the light into the lips. I always look for the easiest way to paint things. And it always comes down to unifying things, not painting as a separate, and then finding their definition. And that might be kind of a little bit of a scary process for the beginners because we tend to think that if we lose definition, we lose our outlines, we'll never find it again. But you will. And the effect of being lost and found again is much better than coloring the shapes and forms inside of outline. You just, oh, sorry, you have to just build the courage to let it go, and then knowing that you will find even better solution, even better interpretation for what you just lost. And that takes time. So you will fail, and we all need to paint a lot of bad paintings. And no matter what level you are, you still, uh, I definitely still produce a lot of bad paintings. But as long as I learn from them, I think it makes it too okay. It's okay to fail. Um, if you go to the museum, you will see a lot of fails, by the way. All right. So what am I doing? I'm going to come back to my bigger brush. And before I get too involved in the lips, I'm just going to get a little bit more of my jar painted. And here again, I am just slightly darkening the value and looking for, again, mostly desaturated version of my skin. So if at some point it got too gray, where she feels almost on the brink of the being, uh, breathless and not alive, of course, we will add more color. But it doesn't take a lot to add the color. It's a lot easier to add the color than to take the color away, I think. So, in that respect, I always feel if you go with less color, you can just add a few brush strokes and it will look colorful. So, painting, if you look at the good painting, Velasquez, Rembrandt, a lot of English school in 1900s, of course, Sargent, Sorolla, you can see that their relationship with color comes to maybe a way to summarize it: less is more, or a lot of nothing and a little bit of something. And only when the Impressionists come into the view in the 1860, 1873, you can see that the color is become to play much stronger role. And that is, of course, explained by, almost devastating effect of uh, photography, where the artist felt that what they could do before, what they could do is paint the likeness and the portraiture, was taken away by photography. But what the camera couldn't do then is to use the color, because of course it was black and white. And so there is a rush of painters that put the color in a pedestal higher than the value. And we know that the way we see forms is by value, not by color. So it was, even though the color becomes a beautiful emotional component of the painting, the form in the Impressionist painting has suffering and becoming somewhat destroyed. I know some of you will disagree with me, but I'm only talking about the traditional way of building the form through the contrast, through the values, not so much the color. All right. So behind the nose, I'm going to sneak a little bit more light in order to separate it from the cheekbone. Again, on the cheekbone, I'm going to put a little bit more color. And by the way, the strongest, most saturated color will always be placed near the transition, just before transition, especially in the paintings that have a dramatic, strong light. Because when you have a strong light, what happens is the light has a quality of washing away the color. And psychologically, the way we build up neurologically, we can only see the color or the value. We cannot see two at the same time. So we can only pay attention to one or the other, not simultaneously. And that is why when you add the color into your light flow, you lose the feeling of light. When you're painting your skin full of color, you will lose the quality of light. The painting will be oversaturated and not look lit up. So consciously, you have to make a choice whether you're going to paint light or you're going to paint the color. And just like I said, it doesn't take much for the color to start to read, right? But it is a value that gives you idea of the form. And in our case, value comes from contrast of light and shadow. Okay, so now when I'm kind of not finished, there is so many things to be adjusted and corrected. A little highlight here. I'm gonna bring a little bit more of the warmer color on the frontal plane of the chin. So now I can come, and now when I see the relationship of one to another, not just paint and no paint, now I can start shuffling and adjusting and bringing more unity to the area. And also in some areas, bringing more light and changing the coloration. So as I was saying, for me at least, I'm not a alla prima painter. Notice how what was too gray now is not that gray at all. So again, I'm coming back to that definition, and that it doesn't take much to shift things into more color. So it's better to start with lesser color and then add more. And of course, you don't have to believe me, because you can try and do it your way. And I think the way we learn is by taking the information in and then reinventing it in our own way. So if you understand the concept of what I'm doing, you don't need to do exactly what I'm doing. You can find other ways, other colorations, other relationship, other edge solutions, which unfortunately I didn't get to do much today. And we might just have a different lesson on that of edge work. It is so important in the portrait. Again, I'm going to finish it by putting a highlight from the top plane, dividing the frontal plane of the forehead into the side plane. I'm going to see how that highlight behaves, whether it's more concentrated or more diffused highlight, how much space it takes. Every highlight is different. So I'm going to come back and maybe warm up a little bit of the jar. I'm going to have a lot of golden hair here, so they're going to throw some reflective light. I'm going to come back a little bit with more light and bring this connection between this plane and this plane more closer together, bringing a little bit of a highlight on the top plane before it starting to warm up here. I'm gonna take a little bit of warmer oranger coloration and bring to the top of the curve of the eyelid. Remember, we talked about finding back, and right away I'm going to see what it does on the other side. So you try always to paint symmetry. Whatever you do on one side should find its echo on the other side of the painting, unless you're painting a profile. Yeah. And then I'm going to bring a little bit of a cooler highlight on the top of that eyelid. I'm sure it's maybe a bit of a cosmetics shimmering there, but I don't mind because it's going to help me to highlight the focal point of the painting, which are the eyes. And then I'm going to bring a little bit more light and a little bit more coolness into the eyeball. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of the light and flow this light from the eyelid into the thickness of the lower eyelid. And then I'm going to add a little bit of gray, blue, and pick up a little bit of a color on the eye. Please be aware that it doesn't take much for the eye to have its color. And then I'm going to bring a little bit of a darkness right there underneath it. And so right now, the development of a smaller parts will start, of making more details. And I'm sure it's would be useful and interesting to see, but I'm just concerned how much time I'm taking for this demonstration. And again, I do have all this painting of the eye, and in my lessons that you can look, and I can make another live stream about it, and please, it will be very helpful for me if you send me your requests on what you'd like to see next time as we meet next time. And I will announce it way in advance. It's going to be probably a second Saturday in December. So again, if you are a free member and you don't want to miss it, just keep your eye for that. I always announce it in my Instagram. Okay. Okay. So again, the first layer is always crude, and that's how we want it. And now I'm just trying to mend some of the value differences, and maybe because I act a little bit too much in a hurry, it really doesn't do the painting good. There is so much to do, but one thing I do want to show you is just, again, the idea of connecting light to light. So as the light streams down the muzzle, it falls and streams down here. And as the light comes in here into this, it opens up the edge here and brings here. And that way, okay. Okay. And so there is more color coming right at the most protruded frontal plane of the lip, and then maybe less color as it moves back into the skin tone. And here, some of that skin tone is infected by the lip color. Oh, sorry, by the lip color, because you can't really lose the edge if they are so different. So we have to find the way to bring a little bit of less pink into the lip and also bring a little bit of a pink into the adjacent shape of the skin tone. That's how we lose contrast in color, and that's what will allow for the lost edge. And of course, we always have our highlight to bring, oops, I don't think I landed in the right place. So I will have to do a bit of a steps here. But again, the main thing is remember that you have to open edges for readability of the forms. You can't keep every form, every shape secluded in its own. They have to talk to each other. The eye has to be allowed in and out of the form. So that's the main, one of the key tasks of the edge work is to open up the flow of light. A little highlight on the bottom here, a little highlight here, highlight. Just a very slight falling of that light over. Okay, and then just a little bit picking up the light under the cheekbone because the jaw picks up the light. Okay, I see a lot of things, and that's a good thing. Things that I can work on and will work on. Remember here, we open the edge of the nose Here we separate the shadow from the cast shadow of the nose. And then if we need to, which I think I certainly do, adjust the shape here. Keep it together for as long as you can, and then figure it out the way to put reflective light that works for the better of the form. And reflective light is something that you can choose to do or not to do. Remember, how much reflective light you put in your painting is completely up to you. If you look at Caravaggio, he didn't put hardly any at all. That's how he created this theatrical drama of light, because there was an absolute darkness in his shadows and complete loss of shapes into the background. I can't emphasize enough the value of studying other painters, especially good ones. There's no point, right, to study bad ones. But to study good painters is like taking painting lessons from a masters. You don't have to copy them. All you have to do is have a dialogue with them and ask them why they did the things they did. To have that insight will help your own painting, and it will help build your own sensibility, your own sense of style, what you like and what you don't like your paintings to be. Yeah. All right. So, boy, do I see a lot of things, and it's very hard to stop. As you probably know, uh, to in that state when you see things, but it's time to quit. Anyway, I am very grateful for you to put up with me and with all my oopses and cutting off the camera, moving the camera, and blubbering around here. But I do hope that it was helpful, and it will be very helpful to me to hear what else you are interested in and want to see. Again, this would be I didn't work on the eye, the sharpness of some of the features, but I hope that a demonstration of how different colors work and how to flow the light over the form. And now when I kind of back away and look more, the minute I get a chance to work on it second time, I will definitely increase a sense of light. And so I see how some of this gets a little bit too dark, and some of this can get a little bit more light and over the form. So each layer I add, I work on increasing the light. So I'm going to switch my camera so I'm facing you. And if you have any questions, the only thing is, how do I know what questions are? Or I see them, but I have to put my glasses. Sorry. Okay. So I think I'm going to end my demonstration. But again, if you have burning questions you want me to answer, I'm happy to do so. There is some. Okay. So, James, the idea of building big bridges and then creating smaller passages is great concept as you go between initial darks and lights. Yes, I get what. Uh, so if you need more explanation, basically, in the beginning, you can't get seduced by small details. You can't start painting smaller planes moving, even though you know they're there and you see them. You must create a bigger planes first before you divide them into minor planes. planes. So big bridges is really flowing the light across, from a starting light edge towards the shadow, across the form, and along down the form. Once that flow is created, you then can choose where you can start to be more details. If we know that the focal point of the portrait is eyes, maybe most information that you bring, the paint quality, the details, the textures, the brushstroke will be around this area. You don't want to draw attention to the ear or to the neck or to the jawline, maybe. There, you're gonna not build a small bridges, but you leave the portrait more, I don't want to say obscure, but more general and not as overdefined. Because again, the quality of painting, when you overdo, when you put every dot on every eye, and get every wrinkle and every, spot, and the portrait becomes about nothing. There is no focal point, there is no intention, there is no conversation. As a painter, you have to decide why you're drawn to this subject, why you're painting. Is it because of, of how beautiful the light falls on its form? Is it how you can create this beautiful harmony of the whole background and the hair and the costume, and maybe just illuminate one eye? And that would be what your message to the viewer is. As a painter, you truly an eye manipulator. That's who you are. That's why you're given the tools of value, color, edges, paint quality, to use them to manipulate the viewer and say, look here. No, don't look here. There's nothing for you to look at. Keep following my road, my path that I'm creating for you. Experience the painting that I'm the way I would like you. Now, it's still not going to happen, right? Everybody experiences the painting the way they do. But as a painters, compositionally, stylistically, color, value, all of those decisions are towards conversation, visual conversation with the viewer. And that's why I said, in the beginning, you're building the stage, you're taking all the shadows out because they are secondary actors in your play. They're not important. And then comes the time to highlight the flow of light. And that is what the painting is about conceptually, and how you execute it, how much light, how much color, and all of it is really your artistic choices. And that's what makes the painting individual and beautiful. Uh, so I, again, thank you so much. And I will look forward next time. I really enjoy teaching that. I know I overwhelm you with information, but if you join me again and you can hear that a second time, a third time, and a fourth time, things are going to get clear and easier. And again, if you want to join my Patreon, at the low level of $6, you get to have this live streams, you get to have short videos, the studio visits, and whatever else. And at $15, you get a whole library of 30 videos that I keep adding. And the new video that I just added, The Girl in the Beret, I hope you like it. So, and also, there is a YouTube channel that I just started that I'm very excited about. And there I also share, well, everything I know, right? Because the way we learn painting is from another people. There is no really books to read. I mean, there are, and there are good ones. But I think how we really pull the knowledge is by watching others do and by explaining the logic behind of what we do. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.